Welcome to the Leaderonomics show. I'm with Dr. Astrid Tuminez, Regional Director of Legal and Corporate Affairs for Microsoft. Dr. Astrid, great to have you on our show. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You have such an interesting background. I mean, you've had an opportunity to hang out with Gorbachev. You were part of the when Soviet Union kind of collapsed. You were there. You've got now you're in Singapore. You're spending time in Asia. You spend a lot of time in the US. Tell us about yourself and how you got to where you got to.
Okay, well, that's a big question. So I was born originally in the Philippines, and then I moved to the United States where I did my undergraduate, and my master's, and my PhD. And I was very lucky in my 20s to have had the opportunity to be offered a job to work in what was then the Soviet Union.
Right, and that was because you did your PhD in Soviet...
Yeah, I was still working on the PhD, but I spoke fluent Russian already at the time.
Fantastic.
And the project was out of the Harvard Kennedy School.
Why did you learn Russian?
Oh. In the Philippines, I had a curiosity about different countries, and I was most curious about the Soviet Union because as an American ally, there wasn't very much in the Philippines that you could learn about the Soviet Union. We were so U.S. oriented, and I was worried about 10,000 nuclear weapons. So I said to myself, as a 15-year-old college student, I was a very young university student, that this was an issue I had to study. So that's how it started.
Okay.
I started learning the language, and I realized that Russian literature was very closely tied to politics. And so all of my passions for literature, for preventing a nuclear war, they all came together.
Right.
And then when I was at Harvard, already working for the Harvard Kennedy School, they offered me the job to go to Moscow and run this project there.
Okay. And what was this project? And what did you do there?
The project was called the Harvard Project for Strengthening Democratic Institutions. And it was looking at the Soviet Union as a country that's about to give up communism. It looked like communism was going to implode. And so they were starting democratic reform as well as market reform, because it was a communist system. They didn't have a free market. And the idea behind this was that you could transfer Western theories and knowledge, the market system, democratic system. So there was a lot of hopefulness built around this project. So we were there. It was funded by a foundation called the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And we worked in all areas. We worked in economic reform, political reform, and also preventing deadly conflict, because there were many different new countries that might arise from that one country, different ethnic groups. And there was a concern that a lot of violence could break out.
And you were there actually at the time where the Soviet Union collapsed, essentially, right?
Yes.
And tell us about was there anything interesting or exciting that happened at that time?
Yes, there were some very, very exciting things. So I remember one day, I was walking down what's called the Ring Road, this very big road, and I was walking close to the U.S. Embassy, and I see Ambassador Thomas Pickering. I had known him in various meetings. He was running, and I knew something was going on. And it turned out that the White House, people were marching on the White House, shooting was happening. Rutskoy, who was then, I believe, Vice President of Russia, was holed in the White House. And this was a time when violence actually happened in Moscow. And I ended up in the middle of all this, and I ended up doing some reporting actually for National Public Radio in the US, because they needed people who spoke Russian to interview those who were hurt and wounded and had been taken to the hospitals. And also during the coup of 1991, I mentioned that I was there. I happened to be in the home of the foreign minister, Eduard Shevardnadze. And when the coup happened, I had become friends with his wife, and we were sitting around the table drinking tea. And it was very interesting because he was in a special communist, elite apartment. And next door to him was the apartment of Anatoly Lukyanov, who had masterminded the coup. And so I'm sitting there. I felt at that point, well, I am living history right now, here and now. And Mrs. Shevardnadze turns to me and she says, "They're going to kill my husband." Obviously, they didn't kill him, but it was just one of those moments that, I don't think I'll have many moments like that in my life.
I know you're also involved in leadership in some way and form. You teach leadership to government agencies. But did that experience when you were young shape you into who you became, the leader that you became later?
Yes, definitely. So because I was so young, I was in my 20s, and I had a chance to witness the implosion of a socio-political system. The change was so massive, people can't even imagine that you live in a country and overnight, your mother who lives in Ukraine, all of a sudden they're foreigners. They live in a foreign country. And let's say you spent 20 years saving money, you have 11,000 rubles underneath your mattress. overnight, the 11,000 rubles, which would have been a lot of money, it becomes worthless because the currency gets devalued. So massive displacement, and I had to witness that.
And massive grief and massive pain everywhere.
Dislocation, massive dislocation, and in a way, massive questioning about who you are. The Russians were questioning, who are we as Russians? And it shaped the way that what I became in different senses. One, just my own belief in myself to get things done. I'm a small, petite Asian woman working in the Soviet Union in Moscow. And I had to learn to be very effective, to be assertive. I spoke Russian, and that helped. So my own early leadership skills were honed. Second thing that I learned is humility. Why humility? We went in there as Harvard. We went in there with all these Western notions of what society should be. And you're very humbled because every country has its own history, its own pride, its own culture. Those things are never going to die quickly or be replaced quickly by something that you're introducing. And then third, it was also a forging of my own, my family life. I had left my husband in New York with a commuter marriage, and it forged that relationship. I've been married to the same man for 25 years, and that's been a pillar of my leadership as well, my family. And that it's possible to do these things if you have mutual support and mutual respect for one another's dreams.
Yep. And speaking of that, you're also very involved in women issues and helping women to empower them and so on and so forth. What do you think are some of the challenges for women to emulate someone like you, to live a rich life with adventure and have it all, essentially, but still be able to balance everything, because that seems to be an issue that keeps cropping up all the time.
First of all, I don't think there's any balance. I have 3 children. So there are times when I feel I'm very intensively with my children and my family, and other times when I'm very lonely, I miss them, I'm traveling, and things are not working so well. So I think in women's leadership, women feel very deeply and painfully the responsibility as wives and mothers. And so I think it's very important, one, that you be true in defining why you do what you do. Because the sacrifice is quite big. That's one. Second, you have to help your spouse, your children understand what you do so that they know that it matters in the world and that's really important. And then third, you have to have the ability to tune out so much distraction. Because culture, in Asia in particular, forgive me for saying this, but I will defend this argument.
Sure.
We are more stigmatizing of women here in the sense that very ambitious, very successful, very bright women, there's more stigmatizing of them. They may be branded as not good wives, not good mothers. Women in Asia, actually, in surveys, will express that they're afraid that they would be punished for being successful. And so it takes a lot of strength.
Inner strength.
It takes a lot of strength. And I always tell, when I give leadership talks to young women, I always tell them, don't marry a jerk. Find a good guy, dreams, your dreams are as important as his dreams.
Absolutely.
And your whole development, everything you have as a person, your education, your ideas, your personality. You want to deploy all of that, not just in the family, but in your community, in your city, in your country. We need all of Asia's human talent.
Absolutely. If you also, I know you're in Russia, but you also were involved in this whole Islamic moral movement, in terms of helping to have talks or negotiate talks. Tell us a bit about that and how that came about and what some of the lessons you've learned from that.
Okay. In 2003, I quit my job on Wall Street to take a 1-year sabbatical. I was going to watch movies and read novels. But
that's what we all say, right?
Yes, that's what we all say, correct. So 2 weeks into my sabbatical, I got a phone call from Ambassador Frank Wisner, the former U.S. ambassador to the Philippines, and I was asked if I would want to get involved in the Philippines because the White House and the Philippine government had agreed that there would be some U.S. involvement in the peace negotiations between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the government. And this is post 9/11. There was a lot of concern that Al-Qaeda may have infiltrated the Philippines. So in short, here I was, a Filipino who had not lived in the Philippines for 22 years, knew nothing about Islam, had not socialized with the Moros, the Filipino Muslims. And at first I said, no, I can't do this. But then, to me, I think great curiosity is very important in life. So I said no, and then I thought for 10 seconds, and I said yes.
There goes the movies. Right?
Yes. Give up the movies and novels. And it was frankly one of the most meaningful jobs I ever had. It marked my homecoming to the Philippines in a very meaningful way, getting to know a part of the Philippines that really has suffered a lot, a group of people that has been marginalized, who lost their lands, whose identity has been threatened, whose religion has been disparaged by the majority, and learning that empathy, their history, and actually as a Filipino being very proud of their history because they had these powerful sultanates. And I think over the course of those 4 years, I was able to gain the trust of people, and in these very sensitive environments, potentially violent, it's really important as a leader to have trust. It is fundamental. You can't teach and you can't influence when trust isn't there. So I absolutely loved it. I worked with young Moro leaders, and I also worked on the substance of the negotiations. And we came up with ideas. We did a lot of research. We brought people from other conflict situations from other countries, brought them to Mindanao. And so to this day, I feel also that was one experience, 4 years of that really has shaped me as a person.
Well, what are some lessons we can, as a community at large, learn from some of these things? I mean, negotiations and trying to resolve conflict, and I mean, it's going on all over the world at this very point.
That's right.
Too.
That's right.
Are there some takeaways that we can learn?
So first is have a respect for history. I often compare that to a marriage. When a man and a woman go to get a divorce, it's not because the problem happened yesterday. It probably began 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Certain bad habits formed and were not addressed. So know the history and respect it. That's extremely important. Secondly, I think it's important for negotiating parties to have empathy. Empathy is about focusing on the other's viewpoint and why they say the things they say, why they feel the way they feel. What is it about them that's been hurt? And bring that into the equation, because when you're talking about land, about identity, about religion, about political systems, they're not easy to resolve. So know the history, develop empathy, and third, always have a comparative perspective. Your conflict is not the worst conflict in the world. If you bring up how many people are killed in other conflicts, you begin to put things in perspective and you say, you're not alone. Group X in Canada, they actually resolved this with their government. Or if you look at Native Americans in the United States, there are many examples you can bring up and say, learn from them. Don't reinvent the wheel. Borrow what you can borrow and then modify it for your own context.
Absolutely, And today you're in Microsoft.
Yes, today I'm in Microsoft.
And that's probably, I mean, it's a very different, interesting challenge here in Microsoft.
When I came to Singapore 5.5 years ago, I had the intent of joining Google. So even back then, I was already interested in technology. But then I opted at the time to join a school of public policy instead, because I wanted to be involved in the business of educating people to become better leaders, especially in government in Asia. Now, Microsoft, the challenges are different. I am not a techie, so I have to educate myself. And this is, I think, a good quality for a leader. Have curiosity, do the homework, educate yourself, be open to learning.
So I mean, like for a young person who's starting out in life, what are some advice you would give if they want to, especially women, maybe young women, that I want to be just like Astrid. What must I do? What advice would you give them as they're starting out in their careers?
Okay, so the first advice I would give to young women and young men too is dream big. It is a very exciting and a very big world. I was born and raised in the slums of the Philippines. I never thought I would ever go see the world or anything, but I dreamt big as a child. I saw pictures in Time magazine and I wanted to see all those places. So dream big. Number 2, do your homework. You have to work hard. You can't sit around and say, okay, my mother is important, my father is important, they're going to help me. That's not good enough. That's never good enough. You're going to have to make your own mark in the world because of who you are and what you know and what you can do. That's what matters. Dream big. Number 2, do your homework. And third, be resilient. Life is not a straightforward shot where good things just happen one after the other. The key to a good life, the key to leading is being able to get up when you fall. Learn from the failure. Be resilient. Get back up. Do it again. And do it with great laughter and great enthusiasm.
Thank you so much. I mean, here we have been with Dr. Astrid Tuminez from Microsoft here on the Leaderonomics show. Thank you so much for being part of this show.
My pleasure. Thank you.